Hello, my name is J.R. Tallman. Today I will be taking you through how to enable advanced revenue management within NetSuite and to create a revenue recognition rule based on Ratable revenue recognition. As you can see, I am on the 2019.1 release preview account within my demo environment. So please take that into consideration while you are doing this training. The first thing I'm going to do within NetSuite is to enable the feature itself. So if you have not done so, you're going to want to go ahead and navigate to Setup, Company, and Enable Features. Advanced Revenue Management is found underneath the Accounting subtab. If I go ahead and scroll down underneath the Advanced Features field grouping, you do see the Advanced Revenue Management field itself. If you do not see this field, please contact your account manager as they are able to get this feature enabled for you and discuss options moving forward. Once enabled, you are not able to disable this feature, so I would recommend you do test this in a sandbox environment or a release preview environment, which I'm doing today. As you can see, it's grayed out once it's enabled and there's no way going back. So take that into very, very serious consideration if you are going to want to use advanced revenue management. Once enabled, you'll see a variety of different field paths as we go through the list, transactions, and so forth. But before we go there and create our revenue recognition rule and create our new sales order, what I'm going to show you are some advanced revenue management accounting preferences. So once enabled, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Setup, Accounting, and Accounting Preferences. Within the Accounting Preferences, underneath the General subtab, if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, underneath the Advanced Revenue Management Only field grouping, you will see a variety of different fields for Advanced Revenue Management. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these fields today, but if you do want to learn more, you can certainly click on the field level help, and you can certainly learn more in Suite Answers or even the help section. All right, so I do want to point out a couple fields that are important, though. These first two ones, the Revenue Arrangement Update Frequency and the Revenue Plan Update Frequency, I have these both set to be automatic here in the system. You have two different options. One is manual, the other is automatic. And what this does is when we create a revenue recognition event within NetSuite, it's going to be a revenue arrangement, and really the plan is what's going to be the schedule of revenue recognition to be recognized, which you'll see in just a moment. And how we want that to update, whether it be on demand, which would be manual, or automatic within the system is up to you. I would recommend automatic once you get used to the system, which will run every 3 hours. If you have it set to be automatic, when you're first going live, you may run into some errors. So if you're doing thousands of transactions, it will be worth doing this manually so you can correct any mistakes that you have made when configuring this. Okay, so I will set this to be automatic, and again, that will run every 3 hours within the system. Some other fields to take into consideration are your default journal entry form for your revenue recognition entries, as well as the reclassification entries, which you can also do. And then finally, make sure if you are customizing your revenue arrangement form, which we'll be taking a look at today, you can select your customized form here. Otherwise, you can use the standard revenue arrangement. But if there are any required fields, you want to remove those or make sure that they're mapped from your source transaction, which we'll also be showing you, which will be our sales order, onto the revenue arrangement. So you can certainly take a look at the other fields and certainly comment on the video if you do have questions. So we'll go ahead and save this accounting preference. And once saved, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at the revenue recognition rule to create our Ratable revenue recognition. This is located underneath List, Accounting, and Revenue Recognition Rules. Now before I go there, you can see that this also, once I enabled ARM, it added revenue recognition events, it added revenue recognition plans, added elements. So we'll be taking a look at a variety of these as we go through. But right now, I do want to take a look at the revenue recognition rules page. As you can see here, I've already created revenue recognition rules. This is a demo account, so take that into consideration. But the one we're going to be looking at today that we're going to be using is going to be internal ID number 5 here, which is the straight line start and end dates. Okay, you could certainly call this Ratable, whatever you wanted to do. You would go ahead and click on New Revenue Recognition Rule. Since I've already created one, I'm just going to go ahead and click on this one itself, but feel free to create one as we go along here. right, so I get a name, straight line start and end dates. Recognition method here is straight line using exact days. Feel free to change that while you're going through this to be by even periods, or if you want to prorate it by even periods, you can certainly change that based on your internal policies. Okay, now I have everything else grayed out here, so I can't go through each individual option because I've already used this within the system, but I do want to point out if you are creating this and you're following along within the system, there's 3 fields that you are going to want to set. Okay, and so the first one is going to be the amount source. And what we want to set this here is to be event % based on amount, because we are going to be recognizing it based on ratable revenue recognition based on the amount of the sales order. Okay, so your other option would be to have quantity here. That would be used for if we're going to be doing fulfillment, and maybe I'll make another video on how to recognize based on fulfillment. All right, so moving along to the next 2 fields, which would be RevRec start date source. This is very important if we're going to be using the revenue recognition start date and end date from our sales order. So you'll see in just a moment when we get to the sales order, I do have start and end dates there. We'll be mapping those to our revenue arrangement, which will then recognize ratably over exact days. Okay, so I would recommend here to be revenue element start date and the end date to be the revenue element end date. And that will take it over the start and end date from that sales order. Your other options are to recognize it based on terms, days, a variety of different options. Don't necessarily recommend that as it's easy for the end user, or if you're integrating within another system, to just set the start and end dates based on the contract term or whatever term that you would like to set. And then finally, you can certainly look at the other fields here, but the key here, as you can see, is going to be the start and end date source, the amount source, and then certainly the recognition method if you want to use exact days or period based. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save this. Just to regroup, we've looked at enabling the advanced revenue management, looked at some accounting preferences, and then finally we created the revenue recognition rule. The next area I want to go through within NetSuite to show you within this training video is to create an item and set the revenue recognition fields. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to my list of items underneath the list accounting and items. I've already set up one here that's going to be the Apple Music subscription. So we'll go ahead and find Apple Music. And we'll go ahead and edit this Apple Music subscription item that I've created. And once you enable ARM, what you'll see underneath the revenue recognition amortization subtab, it might be in a different subtab depending on your customized form, but you'll be seeing a bunch of revenue recognition fields. All right, so we're going to focus on a couple main ones here. Most of these actually deal with if we're doing allocations based on fair values, which I'll show you in later videos, but this one's going to be basically a revenue recognition event based on the start and end dates. Okay, so you can see anything that's with an asterisk is required. You can see this one has a revenue recognition rule already set to be the one that we just created. So that's straight line start and end dates. Okay, so you'll want to go ahead and select your revenue recognition rule there. If you had a different rule, if you wanted 100% up front based on fulfillment project progress, you could certainly go ahead and select that. RevRec forecast rule, typically in this case it would be the same, right? You're going to be forecasting based on the start and end dates. If you wanted to have a different rule, you could, but I don't think that's going to be necessary if you are going to be recognizing revenue ratably over the start and end date. Again, revenue allocation group deals with fair value pricing, so we don't need to mess with that. So those 2 fields are very important. Obviously, they're required, so you can't miss them. And then finally, the create revenue plans on. This is also very important. So what this determines and tells NetSuite is when to actually create the revenue plan, or as I like to call it, the schedule of revenue to be recognized. All right. So when we create a sales order, what's going to happen here is it's going to create what we call a revenue arrangement within the system, and that's going to create the planned revenue based on the start and end dates. Okay, so you could keep this as revenue arrangement creation. In fact, you're going to want to keep it revenue arrangement creation. But if you were doing a different type of revenue recognition based on fulfillment or maybe a project percent complete, you would want to go ahead and change these here, right? So this would be fulfillment with a fulfillment rule. If you had it based on billing, you could have it 100% upfront, so it would recognize 100% at time of billing. All right, so this is important that you make sure that you have the plan equal to the rule that you set up. But in our instance, in this demo, I'm going to go ahead and keep this as revenue arrangement creation. Again, all other fields here really relate directly to fair value pricing and allocations. The only other one that I would recommend that you do not check is this direct revenue posting. As you can see, it's already grayed out on this environment. But if you do check direct revenue posting, you're not going to go through revenue recognition and deferred revenue. Okay. So I'll go ahead and save this item that I've already created. And then the next thing what we're going to do before I take you into the sales order and to recognize revenue is to go to what we call the revenue field mapping. All right, and so this is very important if you're going to be recognizing revenue ratably over the start and end dates. Okay, so we want to take the start and end dates and make sure that they're on their revenue arrangement, so that's what's going to get recognized when our schedule gets created. If we don't do this, what's going to happen is when we create our revenue arrangement, it's going to error out because it will not have any start and end dates on that revenue arrangement. So we're just mapping the dates from our sales order to the revenue arrangement. So this is found underneath Setup Accounting. Once you enable ARM, you're going to actually see a variety of different revenue pages that you could go to, right? You could go to the categories, you could go to fair value formulas. Again, this video is not going to deal with any of the fair value information, but what we're going to take a look at is the revenue field mapping. Right, and so this revenue field mapping is very important, like I mentioned, and I already have start and end dates on my sales order. Okay, they could be standard fields or they could be custom fields, but they need to be at the line, so you can see the transaction line is already selected here. And then I'm just selecting my source field, and so think of this as your sales order, right? The source, right? Because that's going to be our initial page that we're entering the transaction, and then our target field is going to be the revenue arrangement. All right, so all I'm doing here is mapping our source, sales order field at the line, to our target field, which is the same start date on the arrangement. Okay, so you'll want to do that for the start and end date, and then also to map it to the forecast start and end date. All right, so the target field for these are native fields. Source field here are going to be custom fields that I created. All right, so this is very important. If you don't do this, you may have errors when you create the revenue arrangement. Go ahead and move on to creating a new order in the system. So I'm going to go to Transaction Sales, enter Sales Orders. And we'll go ahead and select my customer here. One thing to keep in mind when we're going through this process is the revenue arrangement or the revenue process will not create unless the status has been approved, right? So I could keep it as pending approval, but no revenue recognition is going to be created unless this is approved. And for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and change the status to be pending fulfillment, which is approved in the system. I'm going to go ahead and move down to the line here, which is going to be our item, and I'm going to go ahead and select our Apple Music subscription. And we'll recognize this we'll go ahead and do $1,200. Actually, let's do it a little less. Let's just do $1,000 here. Go ahead and select a tax code since that is required within this demo environment. And then what's going to be very key here is my custom start and end dates that I just showed you on our mapping. So I'm going to go ahead and put a start date here. We'll go ahead and actually start it today, which is 2/19 of 2019. And we'll go ahead and end this 1 year later, which would be 2020. And we'll go ahead and save this sales order. Once saved, what we can do then is wait 3 hours. If you recall, underneath the accounting preferences, we set that to be automatic to create our revenue arrangement and revenue recognition plans, which would be our schedule of revenue to be recognized. But we're not going to do that. We're going to run this on demand. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to underneath transactions. financial, and update revenue arrangements and revenue recognition plans, right? So again, once you enable ARM, you'll see some other pages here, just like we saw underneath the list, as well as set up accounting. But in this instance, we're going to go to update revenue arrangements and revenue recognition plans. All right, so once we're on this page, this is what would be doing it automatically within the system. I do have a couple different options here. I could go ahead and select my source from and to, which would just update this based on the date that I'm selecting this. Okay, so I could go ahead and select 2/19 here as the date. And then click on Update Revenue Arrangements. And that will update the revenue arrangement within the system and actually get created. Right now, it's not created off of that sales order. So think of that as the same as the sales order, but it's going to hold our plan, which will be our schedule of revenue to be recognized. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and click this button, Update Revenue Arrangements. I only need to click it once. Once it's clicked once, it will fire off scripts that will actually create or update the revenue arrangements within the system. And you can go and click on refresh. Okay, again, you don't need to click it multiple times to fire it off, but I would recommend clicking refresh so you can see if it is completed within the system. If you do get errors, you can go ahead and click on the complete to see the actual transaction that errored out. In this case, if you do click on the errors itself, it won't give you much detail. It'll just show you the error message. So I would recommend clicking on complete. Okay, so this is complete for our revenue arrangements. It also created elements, just to, an FYI, revenue elements are our items. So our item on that order was our Apple Music subscription, right? And it's going to be recognized ratably over the start and end dates. Finally here, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for our plan. And this will get updated. Perfect. So 0 errors for all of these things that we just did, which is good to see. So once that's done, what we can do is we can go back to our sales order that we created. And underneath our related records, you'll see the revenue arrangement that got generated. And again, this will only get generated once the sales order has been approved. And that process that we just kicked off manually or every 3 hours gets generated with no errors. All right, so I'll go ahead and click on this revenue arrangement by clicking on the date here. And it will take me into the revenue arrangement. At the line, you can see this is what's called the element. And again, it's just our line item that we had on the sales order. You can view a variety of different columns. There's a lot of fields here for if you're doing revenue allocations and so forth. But again, this one's just straight line based on the start and end dates being recognized on exact days. Okay, so to see how that's going to be recognized, right, based on the start and end dates there, you can either click on this link, right, or this open expand icon here, or you can click on the button at the top or bottom of the page that says View Revenue Plans. If you click on the button, it's going to show you all items within this arrangement. So if you have a lot of items on that sales order, you're going to see a long list here. But if you want to, you can just go into the individual plan by clicking on that little icon. And you can see that this generated a forecast plan and an actual plan. The forecast plan is the same as the actual because I did my mappings with the same start and end dates. Okay, so we're not going to take a look at the forecast. You can certainly look at the forecast if you want by clicking on the hot link here, but I'm going to go and click on 879, which is the actual plan. So within 879 here, if I go ahead and scroll down, you can certainly look at a lot of information at the top there, but the bottom is what it's going to show you the different information on how it's going to be recognized based on the start and end dates. All right, so in this case, I'm going to be recognizing 2740 in February. So the system automatically did this. Certainly if you had allocations, it would also allocate the amount to be recognized based on the allocation, fair value prices, as well as your start and end dates. Once that's generated, once it looks good, what we can do is we can go ahead and generate the revenue recognition journal entry that's going to be generated at the end of the month here. You can run it whenever you want, which we're going to be doing today, but typically it is done as part of the month-end process. And this is very similar to what was done in previous releases before Advanced Revenue Management. So it should be very familiar if you are using revenue recognition within NetSuite. Right, and so this is underneath transactions, financial, and schedule revenue recognition journal entries. You do click on that, you should know that you can actually schedule these. Right, so if you want to run them daily or monthly, you could, but I would recommend just clicking on the Run Now as part of that month-end process. Right, so once on here, what you can do is you can go ahead and change the period, right, that you're on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select February here. And I'm going to go ahead and select the journal entry that we generated, which should be at the bottom of this page here, and it is. Right, so you can see all the way at the bottom here, there is my Apple Music subscription, right, from revenue arrangement 317. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the Create Journal Entries. And while I'm doing this, you probably saw there was a lot of different filters at the top there. You could, filter by customer if you wanted to, and the variety of different, filters there. But I wouldn't recommend it because those are sticky. So what that means is, if you went back into this page, you would need to remove those to show everything to be recognized. So you can get caught up on not recognizing everything within the system. So do keep that in mind when you are creating those journal entries. We're going to go ahead and refresh this. This is complete, 0 errors, which is good to see. And we can go ahead and go to our journal that got generated, which is 183 here. So this should be hitting our revenue and deferred revenue accounts. Now, this is actually hitting an accrued expense account because of my item on that revenue was actually accrued expense. So if we went quickly back to that item, again, you would see whatever you put there in the income account is going to be recognized over the subscription term here. So underneath the accounting subtab, right, you see accrued expense. So that's why it's showing me an accrued expense, but right, in real life, this would be hitting deferred revenue and our income. And what's nice is you do have that link back to the source plan. So if you want to see, this again that we took a look at 879 here, you'd be able to see, that this was recognized within February down below in our journal, and so you can gain that visibility within the system, which is very nice. One thing to keep in mind when you are recognizing this revenue on this journal is it does need to be approved before it shows up in any revenue reports, right? So this is non-posting, right? If we went underneath Actions and GL Impact, what you're going to notice is this is non-posting, right? So you do want to make sure that you do post this within the system. So I'll go ahead and approve this. And you'll see the status change to approved for posting, created from revenue recognition schedule. I'm not very fond of that status, but that is our approved for posting status when they are creating from a revenue recognition plan. So this is posted, and once that's posted, you'll be able to look at the different reports within that suite underneath reports and revenue. So since this is revenue now, well, it's actually hitting accrued expense. So again, if it was hitting revenue, you'd be able to see this underneath revenue by customer, revenue by item. Otherwise, if I wanted to look at the deferred revenue portion, I could certainly do that there. I would also recommend looking at the revenue recognition forecast and waterfall reports. Those are pretty common within most of the clients that I see, but certainly take a look at all the different revenue reports that we have to offer. All right, so that is a very basic introduction to enabling advanced revenue management, looking at the accounting preferences, looking at the revenue recognition rule setup, the item setup, and the field mapping before we created our sales order and revenue recognition arrangement and element. If you do have further questions, please do not hesitate to comment on this video, but hopefully you look forward to more videos that I have, and certainly if you do have ideas, I'm happy to go over any other training videos that you wish to see. So thank you for watching this, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.